Maybe she just doesn't belong here. That was the sentence, sharp, careless, and loud enough for half the staging yard to hear. That trailed behind Staff Sgt. Avery Collins as she stepped off the transport van and into the Nevada heat. It wasn't said to her face, but the tone made it clear the speaker wanted her to hear it. And she did. Every word settled into her like sand grinding into an old wound. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. The sun above the Advanced Combat Training Facility was merciless, burning away any illusion of softness. Avery's boots hit cracked asphalt with a muted thud, left foot landing almost too softly, right foot compensating with deliberate steadiness. She had learned to mask the imbalance years ago, long before anyone here would have cared enough to notice. Her face gave nothing away. Not the irritation, not the exhaustion, not the instinctive tightening of her jaw each time someone turned to whisper about her. She walked toward the admin building, her movements controlled in that quiet, contained way of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible. Mid-30s, plain fatigues, dark hair pulled into a severe regulation bun. She could have disappeared in a crowd of soldiers without trying. And maybe, a part of her still wished she could. Staff Sgt. Avery Collins, reporting for Class Bravo, 12, she said, voice level. The admin sergeant slid a keycard across the counter without looking up. Second floor, room 214. Don't be late for briefings. They don't care what unit you're coming from. No one ever did. Inside the barracks, the smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the stale weight of old boots. Avery scanned the room once. Exits, blind corners, lines of sight. Then claimed the bunk in the rear corner instinctively. Back to the wall. View of the door. Habit. Survival disguised as preference. At evening chow she sat by the window, tray arranged with unconscious precision. She didn't look at the group of younger candidates gathered 3 tables over, but she heard every word. They weren't subtle. Lieutenant Jordan Hale, perfect teeth, perfect posture, perfect confidence untouched by real consequence. Leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. Off to his sides were his usual shadows. Peters, thin and jittery. Torres, built like a recruiting poster. And Miller, the type who used his wit like a blade and enjoyed each cut a little too much. Some folks get here on merit, Hale said, not lowering his voice. Others get here because someone upstairs feels sorry for them. 3 snickers followed. The conversation died the moment Avery walked past, and a muttered comment from Torres trailed behind her like a pebble flicked at her heel. She ignored it outwardly, but she filed their faces away with careful precision. Not out of spite. Out of instinct. Out of the knowledge that threats didn't always show themselves dramatically. Sometimes they came wrapped in casual cruelty. The next morning, the rifle qualification range shimmered under the desert sky. Target silhouettes wavered at 200 meters. Avery's first shot missed wide. Her reload fumbled. Magazine angled wrong. Seconds bleeding away as if her fingers didn't remember what they had once done in darkness, under far greater pressure, without hesitation. When time was called, her target looked like the work of someone being trained, not someone who had been training others for years. Collins, the instructor said, disappointment unmasked. You'll need to do significantly better. Behind her, Hale didn't bother lowering his voice. Guess some records don't follow you when you transfer, he said. Peters laughed nervously. Miller's smile was a thin, sharp line. Torres cracked his knuckles like punctuation. Avery kept walking. The urban combat course should have been easy. A maze of plywood rooms, simulated gunfire, and instructors shouting hits and misses. She had walked into far worse with real bullets in real places no one here would ever be cleared to know about. But today her steps felt wrong. Her angles wrong. Her breaths too measured. She hesitated at a doorway. Just a heartbeat too long, but enough for the system to mark a hostage kill. Red light. Failure. Again. Every hesitation felt like an old instinct misfiring. Every mistake felt like a ghost tugging at her nerves. Once, the sound of simulated gunfire pulled her so sharply into a buried memory that she didn't hear the instructor calling her name until the 3rd try. By evening, the whispers were everywhere. She felt them like pressure against the back of her skull. Deadweight. Tourist. Broken. They thought she couldn't hear them. She could. She just refused to give them the satisfaction of reacting. Only one person watched her differently, Master Chief Donovan Briggs. Quiet, deliberate, and old enough in service years to recognize what most others missed. While the trainees saw a struggling soldier, he saw micro-movements that betrayed long-trained habits. The way she mapped each room she entered. The way she never sat with her back exposed. The way she handled her gear with the precision of someone who had once lived by seconds and angles. This wasn't incompetence. This was containment. The obstacle course confirmed it. Up the wall, across the rope bridge, under the wire. Avery moved cleanly, efficiently. Her time was competitive until the flashbang simulator detonated. The crack of sound froze her mid-stride. Not hesitation. Not fear. A full stop, like a system shutting down. 15 seconds bled out of her like a confession. Whispers followed her back to the barracks that night. Softer this time, but sharper in implication. PTSD. Unstable. Unsafe. She heard every word from her corner bunk. Her eyes stayed closed, but her hands clenched once, tightly, before she forced them still. At dawn, Briggs found her alone on the range, running weapon drills in the half-light. Not fumbling, not struggling, moving with the silent fluency of someone whose training ran deeper than muscle memory. He watched her for a long time, realizing the truth. Whatever was wrong with Staff Sgt. Avery Collins, it wasn't lack of skill. It was something else. Something hidden. Something restrained. And whatever it was, the rest of the class had absolutely no idea what they were provoking. The second week began with a new kind of tension, the kind that seeped into the training grounds before sunrise and lingered long after the last drill had ended. Whispers still followed Staff Sgt. Avery Collins from one station to the next, but now they carried a different tone. Less mockery, more uncertainty, as if the trainees were no longer sure what exactly was wrong with her and whether it might be contagious in some unseen, psychological way. Avery felt all of it without looking up. She didn't have to. A soldier who had lived through real war didn't need eyes to know when she was being watched. What unsettled her wasn't the scrutiny. It was how much of herself she still kept locked behind the invisible walls she couldn't tear down. That morning, the team-based evaluations were posted on the bulletin board outside the mess hall. Avery arrived early enough that most of the crowd hadn't formed yet. She traced the list with her eyes until she found her name. Squad 4, Team Lead, Lieutenant Jordan Hale. Of course. A breath slipped through her teeth, too soft to qualify as frustration, but too sharp to be neutral. She already knew what the day would bring. Leadership exercises, split-second coordination, pressure from all sides, and a leader who had already decided she was a liability before she'd ever spoken a word to him. As she stepped back, the rest of Hale's crew arrived, their voices carrying down the hallway. "You've got to be kidding," Peters said, pointing at the list. "We're stuck with her? Again?" "It'll be fine," Miller replied, his smirk audible even without seeing his face. "We just have to keep her in the back." "Far back," Torres snorted. "As long as she doesn't freeze in a doorway and get us all killed." Hale appeared last, his uniform crisp, expression composed as if sculpted that way. He didn't acknowledge Avery, but his disappointment radiated toward her like heat off sun-baked asphalt. "Outstanding," he announced to no one and everyone. "A wild card. Exactly what we needed today." Avery said nothing. She only adjusted the strap of her gear and walked toward the staging yard. The exercise was designed to mimic a complex urban assault. Multiple buildings, unknown threats, civilian actors interspersed with hostile ones. It was the kind of scenario Avery had once moved through with surgical clarity. Back then, the angles had spoken to her. The geometry of danger was a language she understood instinctively. But here, inside the structure of conventional training, nothing responded the way it used to. She hesitated at the first doorway, not out of fear, but because a deeper part of her mind held her back like a leash being yanked at the last second. Hale stacked the formation badly, too close, too eager to push forward before the team was ready. Peters rushed the entrance and was hit by a simulation round before Avery even cleared her corner. "Great," Peters called out loudly, hand raised to signal his death. "Thanks for the backup, Collins." She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. The instructor marking the scenario had already made a note on his clipboard. One casualty. Poor coordination. Faulty timing. They reset inside the second building, a cramped apartment layout designed for close-quarters confrontation. Hale insisted on taking point. It was clear he wanted the scenario to go smoothly, but his frustration with Avery bled into every command. Collins, stay rear security. Don't advance unless I call you. She obeyed. She always obeyed. She had learned long ago that obedience was easier than the consequences of disobedience, even when the orders made no tactical sense. Hale went through the first room too quickly. Torres followed, covering a blind angle poorly. Miller stepped in to compensate. Avery stayed behind them, retracing their movements, checking the corners they had ignored. To the squad, it looked like incompetence. To an experienced operator, it would have been obvious. Avery's actions were protective, instinctive, precise. But no one here noticed. Peters died again. Torres took a simulated hit moments later. This is ridiculous, Miller snapped. We're carrying dead weight. Hill didn't argue. By the time they reached the third structure, the scenario had devolved into something mechanical, motions without cohesion, progress without strategy. The instructors finally called a halt. Squad 4 is done, one of them announced into his radio. Mark is failure. They still forced the team to finish the exercise, but it felt ceremonial, like performing a funeral march for a mission already lost. When the buzzer sounded for extraction, Hale ripped off his helmet, red-faced and fuming. You're proving my point, he said loudly, gesturing toward Avery. Some people just don't have what it takes anymore. Torres muttered. Should have been obvious from day one. Peters nodded like he understood something about combat he'd never lived. Miller didn't bother hiding his disdain. Avery kept her gaze lowered, her hands steady as she checked her weapon. But Briggs, who had been watching from the edge of the yard, saw the faint tremor in her jaw, the way her shoulders stiffened not with anger, but with something deeper and quieter, like an old injury flaring up without warning. By mid-afternoon, the administrative process had already begun. Recommendations, observations, performance failures compiled neatly into digital folders. Word spread quietly among the instructors. Collins, med discharge pending. Briggs pushed back where he could, but the numbers didn't lie. On paper, Avery looked like a soldier losing her edge, too fragile for high-stress environments, too compromised to continue. He found her on the range at sunset, moving through drills alone. No hesitation, no fumbling, no freezing, just silent, flawless fluidity. This wasn't lack of competence. This was a dam holding back a river. He watched her for minutes, trying to understand the contradiction. The pieces didn't fit. No one became both incompetent and precise at the same time. Not without reason. Collins, he said finally. Avery stopped mid-transition, rifle angled safely downward, expression composed. Evening, Master Chief. You hiding something from me? He asked quietly. Her eyes didn't flicker. No, sir. He didn't believe her. He also didn't press. Not yet. But the sense of wrongness coiled tighter in his gut. Something was off in ways the training reports would never reflect. Something deeper than failure. Something intentional. And whatever it was about to reveal itself far sooner than anyone expected. The heat rolled across the desert in slow, pulsing waves the next afternoon, blurring the edges of buildings and turning the training yard into a shimmering mirage. Avery Collins stood near the weapons rack, wiping dust from the receiver of her rifle, trying, unsuccessfully, to center her thoughts. The evaluation scheduled for the next day felt less like a test and more like a countdown. She could feel it in the way the instructors avoided her eyes, in the way Hale's squad watched her like a liability waiting to fail again. Her dismissal was already a ghost stalking the edges of her mind. But something shifted, subtle as a breath, when the familiar hum of an approaching engine reached her ears. Avery lifted her gaze toward the main gate just as a black SUV rolled in, dark windows reflecting the blinding Nevada sun. It wasn't unusual for high-ranking officers to visit the facility, but this vehicle moved with a purpose that made even the heat seem to pause. Conversations around the yard faltered. Hale and his crew stopped mid-sentence, following the SUV's path with curious frowns. Peters lowered his rifle. Torres unconsciously straightened. Miller squinted, trying to identify the insignia on the license plate. Avery didn't move, but the air around her seemed to tighten, as if her body recognized something her conscious mind had not yet caught up to. The vehicle came to a slow stop near the admin building. For a long moment, no door opened. Then, the rear door swung wide. A man stepped out with the deliberate, economical movements of someone who had been trained to assess a battlefield in a fraction of a second. Commander Marcus Reddick, a name whispered in circles most soldiers never stepped foot in. Broad-shouldered, weathered, with the kind of expression that suggested he'd once grown accustomed to making impossible decisions in places no map acknowledged. He took in the training yard with a single sweep of his eyes. Every instructor straightened. Every trainee stiffened. Only Avery remained still, though a faint twitch flickered along her jawline before she controlled it. Reddick spoke briefly with the driver, then walked straight toward Master Chief Briggs, who had been standing near the perimeter fence observing team drills. Briggs recognized him instantly, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert, but not startled. "Master Chief Briggs?" Commander Reddick asked, his tone calm, but carrying that quiet authority that brought silence like a shadow. "Yes, sir," Briggs answered. "What can I do for you?" "I'm looking for Staff Sgt. Avery Collins." Briggs's brows drew together. "She's here, sir. But may I ask why?" Reddick glanced across the yard, eyes locking onto Avery with unnerving precision, as though he had known her location before he even stepped out of the vehicle. "I'm here to observe her upcoming evaluation." Briggs hesitated. "Sir, she's pending dismissal. Her performance has been a reflection of her conditioning," Reddick interrupted gently. "Not her capability." Avery's fingers stilled on her rifle. Across the yard, Hale leaned toward Torres. "What the hell is this about?" Torres shrugged, baffled. "Maybe she's got friends upstairs." Peters whispered, "That guy looks like he eats other officers for breakfast." Miller only murmured, "Look at Collins. She recognizes him." And she did. Not outwardly. Not in any way the others could read. But something in the set of her shoulders, in the microscopic shift of her breathing, revealed familiarity. Recognition. Maybe even dread. Briggs cleared his throat, trying to reconcile the contradictions. "Sir, she's been freezing in high-stress scenarios. Gunfire. Flashbangs. Kill house drills. The board has already decided. I'm not here to challenge the board," Reddick said. "I'm asking to watch one evaluation. That's all." Briggs studied him. Protocol said he should refuse. But nothing about Reddick's presence suggested. Protocol truly applied here. "And what exactly do you expect to see?" Briggs asked. "The truth," Reddick replied simply. "But only after she hears the right command." Briggs frowned. "Command." Reddick gave a faint, knowing smile. "2 words, Master Chief. You'll understand soon." Avery's squad was assembled within the hour. Gear checked, weapons loaded with training rounds, comms synced. The scenario, a timed, multi-building hostage rescue simulation. The same setup she had failed repeatedly. Hale tried to sound confident as he addressed the squad. "Same plan as always. Keep your sectors tight. Don't hesitate." And Collins. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the others to smirk. "Stay behind me." Avery didn't respond. She simply fell into formation, eyes calm, hands steady. Her exterior betrayed nothing of the pressure tightening around her ribs. Reddick positioned himself inside the observation perimeter, hands clasped behind his back. No clipboard, no equipment, just the quiet intensity of someone who had spent decades watching life or death unfold in real time. Briggs stood beside him, equal parts curious and uneasy. The buzzer sounded. The team moved. Immediately, Avery slipped into the same restrained pattern that had defined the last 2 weeks. Cautious steps, excessive checking of corners already cleared, small hesitations that unraveled the group's timing. Hale barked at her through the comms. Miller muttered something sharp. Torres groaned as Peters took another simulated hit. Briggs exhaled heavily. "This is exactly the problem, sir. She's lost her edge." Reddick didn't take his eyes off her. "No. She's waiting." "For what?" Briggs demanded. Reddick stepped forward, only a few inches, but enough to shift the air around him. His voice carried cleanly across the range toward Avery's position. "Collins, protocol Aegis. Execute." A switch flipped. The transformation was so instant it almost seemed unreal. Avery's posture snapped straight, not rigid, but aligned. Balanced. Purposeful. Her rifle came up with a fluidity that no one had seen from her before. She surged past Hale like she had been unshackled after weeks of suppression. Her first shot dropped a hostile target before its mechanism fully rose. Her second eliminated a threat across the room with a controlled double tap. Her breathing steadied. Her movements smoothed. Her hesitation dissolved like smoke. Peters whispered, Holy, did you see? Hale froze, stunned. Miller stumbled after her, trying to keep up. Torres looked like he was witnessing a ghost. Briggs stared, jaw slack. What in God's name? Reddick folded his arms. The real Avery Collins. She didn't move through the building. She flowed. Angles anticipated themselves. Corners revealed threats before they appeared. She reloaded without breaking stride, transitioned her rifle to her opposite shoulder to clear a tight hallway, and neutralized 3 targets Hale never even saw. 10 minutes later, 20 minutes ahead of the required time, they reached the final room. Avery assessed the geometry in a single glance. 2 shots. 1 movement. Hostage secured. Mission complete. The buzzer sounded, but this time, it was not failure. It was triumph. A record-breaking run. The yard fell into stunned silence. Avery's expression returned to calm professionalism, the dangerous edge she had shown evaporating as though it had never existed. Hale, still breathless, finally found his voice. What was that? How did you? Avery adjusted her rifle, face unreadable. What was what? But everyone knew. Something hidden had awakened. And nothing about her, or this program, would ever be seen the same way again. The debriefing room was small, windowless, and purposefully featureless, a space designed not for comfort, but for clarity. The kind of room where truth had nowhere to hide. A single table sat in the center, metal legs scuffed by years of boots and restless feet. Fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead, casting a steady, indifferent glow. Avery Collins sat at the table, her rifle disassembled into precise, orderly pieces in front of her. She cleaned each component with deliberate care, her movements steady, unhurried. Not a hint of the lethal fluidity she'd displayed minutes earlier leaked into her posture now. To someone who had not witnessed her transformation on the course, she looked like an ordinary soldier performing ordinary maintenance. But to Master Chief Briggs and Commander Marcus Reddick, standing a few feet away, nothing about her looked ordinary anymore. Briggs struggled to find words first. I don't understand what I saw out there. Reddick didn't answer immediately. He watched Avery for another few seconds, as if ensuring her pulse had returned to its resting rhythm before he spoke. Shadow Protocol, Reddick said finally, his tone measured. Classification level above what this facility typically handles. Briggs blinked. Shadow Protocol? That's not something we cover in any training manual. It's not in a manual, Reddick replied. It's not supposed to be. Avery didn't look up, but the subtle pause in her cleaning motion betrayed that she was listening. Reddick continued. It's a containment strategy for operatives trained for deep, off-record missions. Missions where precision and emotional detachment are not just beneficial, they're required. Briggs leaned forward. You're telling me she's one of those operatives? One of the best we ever had, Reddick answered quietly. Avery kept her eyes fixed on the bolt assembly, but Briggs noticed her knuckles tense briefly before relaxing again. 3 years, Reddick said, unfolding his arms. 3 years operating in regions and environments most soldiers never hear about except in rumors. High-value targets. Deniable operations. No backup. No conventional support. No room for error. He paused before adding. And no margin for emotional vulnerability. Briggs absorbed that. So what happened? Why transfer her here? Avery finally set down the cleaning rod and lifted her gaze. Her expression was composed, but there was a tiredness behind her eyes that hadn't been there before the evaluation. I took a hit, she said simply. IED. Close quarters. Briggs exhaled sharply. Explosive trauma? Avery nodded. Shrapnel. Internal concussion. Surgery. Then a medical rotation while they evaluated whether everything was still intact. Reddick took over gently. The program relies on intense psychological conditioning. Deep conditioning. Shadow operatives learn to suppress instinctive responses until a specific authorization is given. It keeps them from going operational at the wrong time. Authorization, Briggs repeated slowly. Like the words you used today. Reddick nodded. Protocol Aegis. A verbal key. Briggs let out a low whistle. So all this time, her performance issues, were the system doing exactly what it was designed to do, Reddick finished. Without the activator, operatives default to a limited behavioral mode. They appear calm, competent enough, but unable to access their full capabilities. Like a dam holding back a river, Briggs murmured. Exactly. A heavy silence settled in the room. Finally, Briggs asked, why didn't the board know? Why let her flounder like that for 2 weeks? Avery's voice was soft but firm. Because they needed to know if the conditioning had deteriorated. If I was unstable. If the trauma compromised the system. And did it? Briggs asked. Reddick looked at her, letting her answer on her own terms. Avery took a controlled breath. The conditioning is intact. But the injury left gaps. Moments I can't predict. Briggs studied her. Really studied her. As if seeing the fractures she concealed beneath the calm exterior. Those freezes, he said slowly. Flashbangs. Doorways. Close-quarter noise. Avery nodded once. Residual triggers. But nothing that can't be retrained. Reddick added, the brass needed proof. Today gave them that. Briggs leaned back, letting out a long breath. Well, that explains why she moved through that course like she built it. It was familiar, Avery said quietly. Close spaces. Angles. Predictable chaos. Briggs chuckled under his breath, not unkindly. Predictable chaos. Never heard it put that way. She offered the faintest hint of a smile, blink and miss. Reddick walked slowly around the table, stopping near Avery's right shoulder. There's something else, Master Chief, he said. Something people outside the program rarely understand. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Which is? The cost. Avery's hands went still. Reddick continued. Shadow operatives don't simply learn tactical skills. They rewire how they process threat, emotion, pain. They're taught to compartmentalize deeply. Too deeply. After years of continuous deployment, the mental walls become heavy. Briggs looked at Avery. Is that why you requested reassignment? To step away? She didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, and with a weight that filled the small room, she said, at some point, sir, you start wanting to breathe again. Without feeling like the air belongs to someone else. The honesty of it hung between them. After a moment, Briggs nodded. I've seen versions of that before. But nothing quite like this. Reddick placed a hand on the table. She's earned the right to choose how she serves next. Training command. Instructional roles. Controlled environments where the protocol won't put her at risk. Briggs frowned. At risk? How so? If she had been activated during one of her freeze episodes, Reddick said, voice low, the brain could have snapped into parallel modes, conflicting impulses firing at once. It's rare, but extremely dangerous. That's why she couldn't self-trigger. Why she needed an external command. Briggs shuddered. So these last 2 weeks could have gone much worse, Reddick finished. Avery reassembled the final piece of her rifle, each motion quiet and deliberate. She placed it neatly on the table, spine straight, shoulders squared. So, Briggs said, shifting his weight, what now? Reddick glanced at Avery first, giving her silent permission to speak. I want to teach, she said. Not because I can't do the field anymore, but because I've done enough of it. And because there are things I know that shouldn't die with me. Briggs nodded slowly, deeply. I can respect that. Reddick added. Her reassignment orders are already being drafted. Just like that. Briggs asked. Reddick allowed himself a small, knowing smile. When you see the truth, you don't waste time pretending you didn't. Avery exhaled. Not relief, not fully, but something close. Something that felt like a controlled release of tension she had held for far too long. Outside the room, trainees moved about, unaware that the woman they had mocked for 2 weeks had once been, and still was, one of the most dangerous operatives ever produced by a program none of them would ever know existed. Inside the room, Avery Collins felt the smallest shift inside herself. A recalibration. A new path forming. Not a return to the shadows. A step into the light. Graduation morning arrived quiet and oddly gentle, as if the desert itself had decided to show restraint for the first time in weeks. The sun was pale at first light, washed in soft gold instead of its usual scorching white. A thin breeze drifted across the training yard, kicking up little spirals of dust that curled and disappeared before anyone could really see them. Staff Sgt. Avery Collins stood in formation among her class, boots aligned perfectly with the chalk line beneath her feet. From a distance, she looked indistinguishable from the others. Same uniform, same gear, same posture. No one would have guessed she had dismantled an entire hostage rescue course in record time, or that 2 weeks earlier she had been one signature away from dismissal. And that was exactly how she preferred it. The instructors moved along the rows, checking spacing, adjusting stray straps, muttering quiet corrections. Some of them glanced at Avery with a curious mixture of respect and unease, the memory of her abrupt transformation still lingering fresh and sharp. A few even straightened their posture unconsciously when passing her, as if she carried some invisible authority now that hadn't existed before. Lieutenant Hale stood 3 positions down, unusually quiet. His normally pristine confidence had dulled since the evaluation. He kept looking toward Avery, quick, darting glances he tried to disguise, but failed miserably at. Torres and Miller were similarly subdued. Peters, the most talkative of the group, hadn't said a word since they formed ranks. They weren't afraid of her, not exactly. They were afraid of what they had failed to see, what they had mocked without understanding, what they had underestimated so completely. Avery didn't hold it against them. She rarely held anything against anyone anymore. The deeper wounds in her life had taught her that resentment was too heavy to carry. But she did notice the change, and she stored it away with the same quiet precision she brought to everything else. Master Chief Briggs strode to the front of the formation, clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked more rested than usual, though his eyes still carried the shadow of the last 2 weeks. The worry, the confusion, the slow realization that he had been trying to solve a puzzle without all of its pieces. He cleared his throat. Graduating class, he began, his voice rolling across the yard with practiced authority. You've completed one of the most demanding programs this facility offers. You've been tested in stress, in discipline, in teamwork, and in integrity. Not everyone made it here. Some discovered their limits. Others discovered their strengths. His eyes flicked briefly toward Avery before he continued. And a few of you discovered something about yourselves that you weren't expecting. Hale shifted. Miller swallowed. Torres looked away. Avery remained still. Briggs continued. But the measure of a soldier isn't in perfection, it's in growth. In what you choose to do when you fail, and in how you rise when the world thinks you're done. If the words were meant for her, she didn't react. If they were meant for the others, they didn't admit it. An instructor stepped forward with a sealed envelope in hand. He handed it to Briggs, who approached Avery with a neutral expression deliberately crafted for moments like this. Staff Sgt. Collins, Briggs said. Avery stepped out of formation, boots landing squarely, posture straight, eyes forward. Yes, Master Chief. He held out the envelope. Special Operations Training Command. Advanced Tactical Instruction Assignment. A whisper rippled through the formation, not disrespectful, just surprised. A week ago, half of them had expected her to leave through the back gate with a box of personal items. Now she was being elevated to a position they could barely comprehend. Avery accepted the envelope with steady fingers. Thank you, sir. Briggs studied her for a beat. You've earned this. She nodded once, slipping back into line. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed slowly. Families greeted graduates. Trainees exchanged laughter and handshakes. But Avery lingered at the edge of the yard, watching the desert stretch endlessly outward. The sunlight was brighter now, harsher, but something in her felt steadier than it had in months. Peters approached first, clutching a coffee cup like a peace offering. Hey, he said awkwardly. So, about the last couple weeks. We didn't know. I mean, we had no idea what you were dealing with. Avery regarded him, her expression calm. Most people don't. And that's how the program was designed. Peters nodded, relief softening his features. Still, I'm sorry. She offered a small, genuine nod. Thank you. He stepped back, giving room for Torres and Miller, who hovered nearby. They didn't attempt apologies, not verbally. But the stiffness in their postures, the careful respect in their eyes, said enough. Then Hale approached, slower than the rest. He struggled with words. She could see it. For someone used to commanding a room, humility sat awkwardly on him. I misjudged you, he said finally. Badly. Avery considered him for a moment. You judged what was in front of you. You weren't supposed to see the rest. That doesn't make it right, Hale replied. No, she agreed. But it makes it understandable. He nodded, letting out a slow breath. She could tell the experience had shaken something loose inside him, something he needed shaken. Good luck in the new assignment, he said quietly. You too. With that, he stepped back and walked away, leaving her in the quiet warmth of late morning. She found Briggs packing equipment into a crate near the range, muttering at a stubborn latch. He looked up when she approached. You heading out? He asked. Soon, she replied. Orders say report next Monday. Briggs wiped sweat from his brow. You'll be good at it. Teaching, I mean. She looked down for a moment. I hope so. It's different from everything before. Different can be good, he said. Different means breathing room. Avery smiled, small, but unmistakably real. Reddick said something similar. Smart man, Briggs grunted. Scary, but smart. Avery glanced toward the horizon, where heat shimmered above the sand. Is he still here? He left before the ceremony, Briggs said. Didn't want to make a spectacle. She nodded. Of course he didn't. People like Reddick moved like shadows, appearing only when necessary and vanishing the moment their role was done. Whatever comes next, Briggs said, you're not alone in it. Not anymore. Avery looked at him then, really looked, saw the sincerity behind the weathered features, the respect behind the eyes. Thank you, Master Chief, she said. He shook his head. Just Briggs now. She allowed herself a quiet laugh. All right, Briggs. Later, as she walked across the yard toward the administrative building for out-processing, she felt the strange, familiar duality of closing one chapter and stepping into another. For years, her life had belonged to the shadows. Unseen missions, hidden orders, coded commands. She had lived in the margins, defined by secrecy and precision and silence. Now she was moving into the open, into classrooms instead of kill houses, into mentorship instead of missions, into a space where she could finally let the dam ease without fearing the flood. And as she reached the doorway, she paused and looked back at the training yard one last time. The place where she had fallen, broken, risen, revealed, and reclaimed herself. For the first time in a long time, Avery Collins felt the quiet, steady pulse of something she had almost forgotten how to name. Hope.